Welcome. In this video, I'm going to just have a freeform talk about one of the jobs that we have in RackForms, and that is the sports demo job. So it looks like this right here. And the basic idea is we have two really simple fields. We have a name and address field. These are simple text fields. And then we have this guy right here, sports. And the first thing about this guy is it is a dynamic field. So if I scroll down to its data source properties right here, I have dynamic query turn to yes, and then its source SQL select name and ID from sports sport. Now I should just say this prefix right here, sports, is just so these three tables stick together in the database. If I was doing this as a standalone job for a client, I wouldn't have the sports prefix. I would just have a database called sports, and then these table names would just be sports, user, and user sports. But just for our keeping here, we have sports as a prefix. And I bring that up mainly because if I was designing this job, I probably wouldn't do that. And two, it sounds a little bit funny to say sports underscore sports, sports underscore user, etc. But these this table right here, you can see this sports table has an ID and then the name for the sport. And one of the features that we use in RackForms is the ability to query both of these values and populate a checkbox, in this case with this. But this could also be a select item or a radio item. And the way that we do that is we notice down here it says all items displayed as label value. And I know it's probably a little bit hard to see in the video. Make sure, by the way, you're in full screen when you're watching this video because it's in 720p. So you want to make sure you're getting the maximum quality. But the label value simply means that if I'm in a data source item here for a select item, checkbox, or radio item, if I select two fields, name and then in this case ID, the name is going to be the label of the field and the value is going to be the ID. And that's really important because the whole point of this job is we have a related table. And so we don't want the value of these checkboxes to be the names of the sports. We want it to be the ID value. That is this guy right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. The way that we do that then is, or I should say really the reason why, is we have this user table here where we have a name and address for the user, and that is simply these two fields right here. But then the sports, when we hit submit, the sports information comes from this right here. So we take the user ID, in this case let's say 4 right here, and then we apply the sports that they've selected from this checkbox right here. It's important to note that there are a couple of different ways of doing this, as there always are in complex jobs like this. In that here we're using a separate table to contain the sports that this particular user has checked that they like. Though we don't actually have to have a separate table for this. We could just as easily use the user table and just have another column called sports. But in this case we're using a related table because it allows us to show that we can use more than one SQL plus query. So, as a brief recap then, again, two fields, name and address. Sports is being driven by a dynamic query to sports, which is this guy right here, which means that when we run this form, we're going to get a checkbox list where the names of the field are going to be tennis, basketball, running, football, and soccer, and then the ID, or I should say the value fields, excuse me, are going to be 1 through 5. When we submit this form, we're going to go to our confirmation page and we're going to do two SQL plus queries. The first SQL plus query is going to insert into sports user, and we're going to put in the name and the address. Then we use our two tokens, name and address, to put those values in. That, in other words, means this ID field right here, which is an auto increment value, that's going to get a value automatically. But then name and address is simply going to get its value from these two fields right here, name and address. Name, address. The key, though, is that when we run this query, because we have a related table, we want to grab our last insert ID. Last insert ID is available to us because this field is an auto increment field, right? So when we I'm going to, you kind of see this, move this up a little bit here. This field, this ID field right here, is a primary key in auto increments. And so because of that, whenever we insert a row into this table, we're automatically going to get a new ID, and it's going to auto increment from the last one. So the next record that we insert is going to be 7. And then we can grab that value back. We can grab that number 7. Because we want to take this value, then we want to take, in the case of the next submission, we want to take ID 7, and we want to use it as a user ID for this table right here. So if I was doing this by hand, let's say I'd insert a new row. Notice here this got automatically 7. We'll say John, and he lives at 103 Tester Street. If I'm doing this by hand, I want to say, well, John likes 2 sports. And so I'm going to go into this user table right here, and I'm going to put in the user ID of 7. And then for the 2 sports, I'm going to say 1 and 3. We're going to talk about this formatting in just a second here, this pipe. But it just means that if I'm doing this by hand, I would just look and I'd say, right, this is user ID 7, so therefore I'm going to put a 7 in right here, and then its 2 sports are going to be this right here. If we're automating that, though, that is, we're using a form to do that, we need to programmatically grab that ID back, and that's what this does. Set last insert ID into retval. And so this hint tells us everything that we actually need to know about this, which means that when we check this box, this SQL query which we've run here is going to return a PHP variable called retval. And that retval is simply going to be the number of the field that we've just inserted into. We use that then in the second query. So the first query we're writing to the user table. The second query, now we're going to write to this user sports table. Sports, user, sports. Right? So if we go back to our table, remember that's what we just did here. Sports, user, sports. And we're going to say insert into sports, user, sports, the ID user and ID sport. And again, that's just our 2 fields, ID user and ID sport. Let's move this down here a little bit. And then our 2 values, because we use prepared statements in RackForms, so we can't, so we're not susceptible to SQL injection. The 2 values then are, remember, retval and the form field sports. So if we take a look at these 2, retval, remember in this first statement right here, retval was $retval. But because we use tokens, we're going to instead use the tokenized form of this, which is simply $, and then the 2 braces retval. $, the 2 braces, and retval. So whenever we want a PHP variable, we use the $, and then the name of the variable inside the braces. And we've got this tooltip here that actually shows us that. So if we want a form field, we use F in a pair of braces. Session, we use an S. And then again, towards the bottom there, you can see $, and then the name of the PHP variable. So in this case, we're using F and then sports, which means the form field name sports. So if I click on sports here, you can see that its name value is indeed sports. And so just so you can see what this is, right in basic attributes here, name value is sports. Therefore, if I want to grab that field and put it into the database, I'm going to use F sports. And of course, we should mention that we have the dynamic variable picker as well. If I click this guy, here's those 3 fields. So if I, for some reason, wanted to insert name again, all you have to do is just click name, and RackForms is automatically going to put in the token for the form field name. But hopefully it's pretty simple to remember. F for form fields, S for session, P for post, etc. So anyway, this form then, we're going to submit it, and we're going to, in this first guy, grab the retval of our insert, and then to this guy, we're going to use that retval as the first variable, that is our ID user, and then the sport is going to go into F sports. So we can actually take a look at what that looks like. So we'll say Howard, 104 Tester Street, and we'll say he likes running, football, and soccer, and then we'll hit submit. Go to our confirmation page, and now, sure enough, if I go back to my database, hit F5 to refresh, we'll see this ID user of 8, like sports 3, 4, and 5. And then if I hit refresh here, we'll see record 8, there's Howard, and there's the sports that he likes. So that is the first part of this form. The second part then is going to be the builder page, and we're going to take a look at that next.